How you doing, bud? Let's talk about Rod Stewart and the Alexander roller rink. Can you tell us the story of Rod Stewart and his career?
Yeah, for sure. Rod Stewart, I started with Rod when he was the opening act for Janis Joplin, Big Brother, at the Alexander roller rink. And in fact, Barry Richards and I were partners, obviously. We were there at that show. Derwood Settles promoted it and produced it, and we did it. And Barry and I sat there with Jeff Beck, and we thought Rod Stewart was Jeff Beck because he was the lead singer. But the lead singer for the band was Rod Stewart, but the lead guitarist for this band of Jeff Beck was Rod Stewart. Rod Stewart was the lead singer. Jeff Beck was the lead guitarist. Then, after that, they came back to the Alexander roller rink with Jethro Tull opening, and Time Was just out, and the headliner was Jeff Beck.
Wow.
And Jeff Beck on that tour had already moved on to Rod Stewart, and that's where he recorded Gasoline Alley, and it was a huge success. After that, Rod Stewart went on to go with Faces, and Ronnie Woods was in Faces, and then Rod Stewart got to Faces also, and they played for us in Fairfax. We decided to do an in-store with Rod Stewart and Faces for Faces' first album called First Step, and that was released in March of 1970, and we thought we would do an afternoon record album release party for First Step, and that night they were playing at the Wheaton Youth Center doing 2 shows, and there was the band Grin, Niels Lofgren, was the opening act. So in the meantime, nobody showed up for the afternoon record release party for First Step by Faces featuring Rod Stewart. So they were staying. I remember I had them staying at the Holiday Inn in Fairfax, and nobody showed up for First Step. I drove them back to the hotel. They were a little pissed off, to say. And so we had the band tore up the room at the hotel, kicking a soccer ball, knocking stuff over. I think I had to pay $300 or $400 in damages to get out of the hotel. Then we went to the Wheaton Youth Center that night, and the Faces had the headline. The opening act was Niels Lofgren, Grin, and what happened was Niels played the first show, and then we had Rod come on, but everybody there wanted to hear Gasoline Alley, and Rod and Faces were playing First Step, and they gave him a really hard time. So then everything they cleaned up from the first show.
But they wanted to hear the good old stuff.
And
Rod's good old songs.
They wanted to hear Rod
stuff,
Stewart's Gasoline Alley. They didn't care about Faces' First Step.
Yeah.
So for the second show, we cleaned up everything, Rod still wasn't happy, but we have to do a second show. And so we got Rod Stewart backstage, and Nails comes out to open the show with Grin. And that was when they had the three-piece band. And before Nails started the show, everybody was cheering. They loved Nails. And Nails said, hey, look, Rod Stewart and Faces, he joined Faces. They've got this new album, First Step. And I know you may not be familiar with it, but give them a chance, be polite. And Nails actually saved Rod for the second show. People would pack, they were sold out, but they gave Rod a polite, they still wanted to hear Gasoline Alley, which I guess they did a few numbers, but they wanted to do some of First Step, and the crowd was polite thanks to Neil. I always remember that, thanks to Niels Lofgren. And then, when the band finished up, when Grin finished, and then Rod came on, everything went good until after the show, when this was in the winter, this is March, Rod's coat, he had a long coat, and the dressing room, somebody stole his coat. It was a typical afternoon or evening to finish it off. And
was it a fur coat or what coat?
I think it was a fur coat. I remember he went back in the dressing room, and then I heard him, hey, somebody, where's my coat? Yet I think it was a fur coat. It was, that was typical of Rod Stewart, and that was it. And then the last time I remember, you talking about Maggie May. What happened with Maggie May was they had the Faces getting ready for the second album, and also in the interim of all this, the Mercury Records, which Rod Stewart was signed to as an independent artist, and also then he had faced the other band, Faces. So what happened is Mercury looked at the Rod Stewart, Maggie May, and decided it would be, I don't know what the A track was, but they decided that would be the B track. And ultimately, some disc jockey somewhere flipped that record. You got to remember, people had vinyl. They flipped that, and the B side was Maggie May, and the rest is history. He went on with Maggie May to initially, it was what they called a turntable hit in the summer. And by the autumn, by September, October, Maggie May was a top 10 record, and he went on to tour as Rod Stewart and Faces. And that was how all the hits came about. And the Faces played with Rod Stewart, but it was Faces and Rod Stewart. And initially, Rod Stewart was trying to blend in with Faces, tried to be just Faces, but they couldn't sell tickets, and Rod Stewart could. And so it became Rod Stewart and Faces.
I remember him playing Painter's Mill in Baltimore. He played there. Remember Painter's Mill?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, he played there. I remember him playing there. And
well, that was as Rod Stewart, I think. It was not
exactly right. Yep, you're right.
It was
you're
not
right.
Faces.
Yep.
He was still a solo act. Actually, it was a solo act, and he was playing as Rod Stewart and promoting Gasoline Alley, because Gasoline Alley was a huge record for Rod Stewart solo.
When we went out to lunch the other day, I remember you bringing up Jesus Christ Superstar. Tell us about you doing Jesus Christ Superstar.
Yep. I did the show, Jesus Christ Superstar, at the Diadem Dinner Theater in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And that was at the time when Jesus Christ Superstar was almost a religious act.
Yeah, it was huge, yeah.
And everybody would, wanted to do, churches and stuff were doing Jesus Christ Superstar, the soundtrack and stuff. So I got a phone call from a guy who I booked bands with Domestic Sound. And he said, "Hey, bud, we're getting an offer from the Diadem Dinner Theater. They're going to do Jesus Christ Superstar, and they want to know how much we want to do it." I said, "Okay, well, and we'd like you to negotiate our contract as an agent." I said, "Okay." So I went up to the Diadem Dinner Theater and had a meeting with the principals of the Diadem Dinner Theater. And among the principals of the Diadem Dinner Theater at the time was the wrestling promoter, Vince, and he was the junior to Diadem. And he was doing shows at the dinner theater, and we sat down, and they offered me, they wanted a band to do the music of Jesus Christ Superstar. And I said, okay. And it came down to money. And how much did I want? And one thing was a number, and the other was a percentage. And I knew about the Diadem Dinner Theater and the Jesus Christ Superstar and what its potential was. So I said, I'll take the percentage. And I went back to the band and I said, hey, we're going to do a percentage. And I was getting 15% of what the gross was to the band. So in other words, if the band made $3,000, 15% of that, $3,000 went to me. And so we did it. We took it off. And the next thing I know, we're going 2 nights a week. Now we're 4 nights a week. Now they're an afternoon and an evening. We were making so much income. Ultimately, it was the gross was at least $3,000, $4,000 a week, wow. And I was getting 15% of that, wow. And it was going great. Everything was fine. Then Robert Stigwood, who was RSO production, he was with the Bee Gees. If you look on the Bee Gees album, mm-hmm. That whole thing, it was produced by, the RSO Records was produced by Robert Stigwood. Then Robert Stigwood decided, hey, we can keep this going. We've got, all these people. We had churches bringing buses to the Diadem Dinner Theater. Then they the Diadem Dinner Theater put packages together for dinner and the show. So Stigwood buys it, and Stigwood now owns the rights to the show, Jesus Christ Superstar. So he wants to do the movie. I don't know if you ever saw the movie, mm-hmm. But he goes around and shuts down all these shows that are featuring, their churches doing Jesus Christ Superstar. And Stigwood goes around with a lawyer to close them all down so that when he puts his Jesus Christ Superstar movie, it'll be the only one.
Exactly.
So they call a meeting at Diadem Dinner Theater. I went up to it and representing the band, and they said, we're going to have to close down because Robert Stigwood is going to sue us. I said, yeah, you can fight it because you had Diadem Dinner Theater before Stigwood owned Jesus Christ Superstar. You'll win. But by then, Vince, the wrestling promoter, Junior, figures, he says, man, we don't need the Diadem Dinner Theater. I can write a play. It's okay, So they shut down the Diadem Dinner Theater. Mm-hmm. The next thing, Vince, the fight promoter, Vince Jr., writes this play. And it's something that has to do with Jesus, and it's blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the night they had invited, I think, the Evening Star came out to the show to review it, and it rained. So I remember, this didn't last long because it was horrible. But the next time the Evening Star did a review, it was about Vince's show, and it was raining. And his closing line was, I think God was trying to tell you something. And maybe a couple of weeks, I don't know how long after that, it shut down. And they, of course, never could reopen Jesus Christ Superstar because Stigwood had gone a full boat, and he had the movie at that time just playing Jesus Christ. And later they revived that play. In fact, my wife Debbie went to a number of those plays, and Ted Neely, who played Jesus, she was really close with. And there's pictures on, I don't know if you got them or you should have, of a couple of Debbie with Ted Neely.
Well, that's a great story, Bud. We're going to close. We have two pictures here. One of Alice Cooper here, you and Alice Cooper, and then the bottom one is Shaun Cassidy. Can we close by just talking about these two last pics? What was this flyer here, and where was it?
That was at the Hammerjacks. And what that was Alice Cooper had an album on Epic Records that was just released that time, and it was Trash. And it was called Trash. And I remember Bed of Nails was a big single for it, and but that was Hammerjacks, and we had an autograph party, and that picture of me and Alice is on the second floor balcony. Tangier was the band, and if you got an album, I think the albums that night were free, and you could get in line up on the second floor, and you could get Alice to sign it. So you got an autographed album of Trash at Hammerjacks. And it went on. In fact, that was one of his big albums in that time period. And Alice and I went to dinner with him that night.
Yeah, you look like a pretty shady character right there,
Yeah,
standing next
and
to
then-
Alice.
And,
You look shady there, bud.
hey, whatever gets through the night. But and Alice, if you look close, that's the second floor balcony, and there was a line behind that all the way down the steps, and you'd get and Tangier was playing, and the band members would get behind Alice, go up, and this one is where that was in the city paper. The
Promotional thing, yeah.
the promotional
Gotcha.
thing, and this one was that was the autograph.
Gotcha.
And so that's what.
Nice.
Now this one was Shaun. See that Shaun?
Yeah, Shaun Cassidy is right.
His
let's
second
see.
one,
Yeah, that's Shaun Cassidy there.
and that's Dick. That's the promoter of
Yeah.
the concert tour. To
There
this,
you are, right?
Yeah, but go this side.
Right here.
All right, that was the Warner Brothers promotion person.
Okay.
And he was a great guy. I can't remember
All right.
his name, but
What year was that? And where was that at again?
that was at the Baltimore Civic Center. I had
It's
just
like 1978 or something.
70. It's either 77 or 78.
I'm pretty sure it was 78. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I remember Googling it and it said the show there was 1978.
Okay, but that was at the Baltimore after we had cleaned house.
Mhm.
Now, all the way, you had Dick Klotzman. All the if you get the pointer there,
There you go.
that's
I'll tell you.
that's,
You take my pointer. There
okay. All right, right there. The first
you
one.
go. Okay, the one with the white coat on.
Well, there's right there.
Over there. I got you.
Larry
Okay.
Collins, who was the promotions person.
Gotcha.
There. That's Dick Klotzman,
Okay.
which was the concert
He's a
promoter.
guy you work with a lot
Yeah,
of times.
and
Yeah.
that was Shaun Cassidy. Then this was me.
The tall guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
tall guy. And then this was Warner Brothers Records promotion person,
Gotcha.
and I should know his name. And that was the night we talked already about that. That was the night Oprah Winfrey
Yes.
was at the show.
Yes.
And she had just come to Baltimore.
Yep.
And Debbie, they were going to throw her out because she didn't have a backstage pass.
Uh-huh.
And Debbie knew who she was. Debbie, my wife,
Uh-huh.
knew who she was and gave her pass because nobody was going to stop Debbie because it was my wife. And so even though she didn't have a backstage pass, that got Oprah. And then upstairs was a press conference on the second floor. And Debbie got Oprah into the press conference.
Wow.
And there we are. And
Wow.
Dick, in fact, Dick had a party for Shaun out at his farm after the show.
Wow.
And there was a band called Virgin, and Virgin was the opening act. I still remember him. And I let them into the press conference, I remember, upstairs.
Well, we had a blast. These were great stories. Tony, the producer, and I are laughing the whole time. Will, our video guy, Sims, he's laughing. We're all just, they're really some funny stories and some original stories. But ladies and gentlemen, the greatest talent coordinator ever, Bud Becker. Thank you so much, Bud. Thank you.
My pleasure.